Our next guest I got in touch with some time ago, and I have been so looking forward to having Tom on the show. Tom Henderson is our next guest. Tom retired from a career in engineering, and in 2011, he founded Graceful Willow Productions in the same year to seriously pursue a longtime interest in filming biographies and documentaries. To date, he has made 3 films, all with Antarctic themes. Tom is an Antarctica veteran himself, serving with the U.S. Geological Survey as a cartographer on the ice in 1979 and 80 and 1981 and 82. He wintered over at Amsden Scott South Pole Station in 1982. He returned to Antarctica in 1997 as a marine technician aboard the research breaker Nathaniel B. Palmer. He's got a new movie that he's working on, and I'd like to talk about some of his other work, but just his experiences in Antarctica. It's called Ice Eagles, An Account of American Aviation in Antarctica. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get Tom on the phone. Tom, good evening. Welcome to AM 630 and the Fringe Radio Show.
Well, thank you very much, Pat. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, thank you for giving up some time. Hopefully you're enjoying some nice weather out on the East Coast tonight.
Oh, we had our first really beautiful day today, and after the winter we had, it's more than welcome.
Yeah, well, being that you've been in Antarctica, that East Coast was just like Antarctica this year.
Yeah, don't remind me of that.
Although, wait a minute, I got to take that back. I have had an opportunity to talk to one other person, and I mentioned that, and they said, no, not even close, not even a chance. It is quite different down there.
It is. It's very extreme.
Well, I touched the surface a little bit with your bio. Maybe you could give our listeners a little more backstory, how you got into doing what you do in your film company. And then I'd just like to spend some time. You sent me some great talking points, and we got a lot of questions sent in for you. How you kind of got into everything that you do that's brought to you where you're at today?
Well, it started with my first trip to Antarctica in 1979, and I caught the bug.
Uh-huh.
Anyone who's been down there will tell you that it gets into your blood. It just there's something about it that is so unique and so special that for many of us we're constantly drawn back. So I did finish my career in another field. I had been dabbling in filmmaking, not formally, but as a hobby to start with, for about 10 years before I retired, and I knew that I wanted to do more with it. I had the bug for Antarctica, and it seemed like a pretty good fit, so I started filming bios of people who had been down there. And then I got more interested in the aviation aspect. And early 2014, I did some extensive research to see if anyone had covered the history of Antarctic aviation, the U.S. history. Mm-hmm. I knew that with my resources, I would not be able to attempt anything on an international scale, but I felt that I could cover the ground for the U.S. Involvement. So I found that there was no comprehensive film that had been done, and I started then doing more serious research, and that led me to interviewing towards the end of 2014. I've done a number of them since then, and will continue through the remainder of this year. I'm hoping to begin the editing phase early next year, and finally release the film about mid-2016.
Gotcha. What, if I could ask you, and these questions, they might be quite simple, but I think most people don't. I mean, there are books about Antarctica. There are, there are some documentaries out there, but there's not a lot of information. To me, it seems, Tom, like it's almost another planet. If I remember a couple of years ago, I believe one of the, if I'm not mistaken, one of the researchers had some sort of physical ailment. I believe it was a lady or a woman doctor had a heart attack or something, and she had to wait, literally weeks to get flown out of there. It's almost like being on another planet.
It's very unique in that regard because the environment is so extreme. Your temperatures can hit 127 below zero. Mm-hmm. Winds can reach 200 miles an hour. It's not your ordinary place. And the incident you were speaking of, I believe, was the evacuation of Dr. Jerry Nielsen.
That's it.
From the South Pole Station. Now, South Pole is right at the geographic pole. The station is. And she was the physician on station. During the winter, she had self-diagnosed cancer, breast cancer.
Okay.
That was moving very rapidly. But the problem was that because the temperatures are so low during the winter, it's virtually impossible to get an aircraft in or out of there between roughly March and, let's say, end of September. The temperatures typically are well below minus 50, and it literally freezes the hydraulics on the aircraft, so it just doesn't operate at those temperatures.
Now, when is there summer in the Antarctic? I'm the only place I'm familiar with. I've seen pictures. A couple of years ago, I had this wild hair. I found a link. I've been in the IT business for 30-some years. I'm a contractor. I work as a programmer, IT project manager. And I saw that there was actually some openings down there at some different countries. Had a data center of sorts down there where they were looking for IT personnel. And I think and I don't know if this tip is typical for everybody, but it's not like you just say, I want to go to Antarctica, get on a plane or a boat or a ship and go. There was, if I remember, Tom, looking back at this, there was a series of tests that you had to take. You had to be very have a lot of knowledge. It wasn't just like if you had a lot of money you could go. I mean, it takes quite a bit to get down there.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's an expensive proposition. Most everyone who's on the ice are involved in research of some sort, mm-hmm. Or research or the support function, which would be primarily aviation, but there's a lot of other facets to the support as well. And that's, you just don't, as you said, jump on a plane and go down there.
Right.
You'd be paying out a lot of money if you were to try to charter a trip down there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think the place where they were was McMurdo Station is where they were looking for these people. And I remember just inquiring on some information. There was a series of tests. I know one book I was looking through talked about, if you're driving a car and let's say the radiator springs a leak, what do you do? Do you pull over? Do you capture the antifreeze? I mean, it's kind of a sterile place, if you will.
Yes, there's nothing there to support life. You have to bring everything with you, and sometimes that, even though in the conditions today, it's pretty plush compared to when, let's say, Amundsen, Scott, and Shackleton were down there. It's easy to once you're there, it's easy to sort of take it for granted. Mm-hmm. You go to the mess hall to be fed. You have the rooms heated, and it's not bad living. It's a bit Spartan, but it's not bad. But every bit of that has to be brought down from the outside. There's no way to survive on your own down there without the external help.
Now, when is summer and winter occur? Is there a summertime down there, if you will?
Yeah, there is. The seasons are reversed because it's in the southern hemisphere.
Okay.
So the activity, of course, there are winter overstations, and people are assigned to those all across the continent, fairly sparse when you compare it to the summer level of personnel. But Generally, the activity, at least in the American side, McMurdo, begins late August when windfly, it's called winter fly-in, takes place, and it's still dark at that time, or largely dark. And then things begin to gear up from late September through mid-October to late October, and that's when a lot of the activity really takes place. From there until roughly the beginning of February. In some cases, with some projects, it goes as far as March, but that's about it for the summer activity.
What's the temperature like, Tom, during their summer? Is it still snowing, or are there days when it's not that bad outside?
Yeah, it can vary quite a bit. It's actually in McMurdo, it can be quite comfortable. When I was there, at one point it was up to 40 degrees.
Oh wow!
Which is, for an Antarctican, that's t-shirt weather. But typically in McMurdo during the summer, it'll be in the 20s to 30s. Wow. Very tolerable. At Pole Station, it's more like the minus 20s.
Now, is that where were you working at, and with some of with the films and that? Do they cover all different parts of the continent?
You're referring to the films that I'm doing?
Yes.
Well, of necessity, they'll cover the areas where the U.S. was involved. Those are primarily the McMurdo Station. There was an old series of stations called Little America that Admiral Byrd founded back in the 1920s. We still support on and off a Byrd Station, which is an inland station up on the ice cap. Of course, Amundsen Scott South Pole is continually occupied. And we have one up on the peninsula. If you're not familiar with the geography of Antarctica, there is an arm of the continent that stretches up towards South America, and parts of it actually go beyond the Antarctic Circle. Mm-hmm. And up in that area, we have another station called Palmer. That's referred to as the Banana Belt.
Okay.
The weather is so moderate compared to the rest of the continent. Gotcha.
So when did just looking through some of your talking points, first expedition 1928, was that the first expedition down there? Was that the first time man set foot down there?
No. Actually, the first people to set foot on the continent, at least as far as we know, were in the late 1800s. It had been sighted. Various mariners had sailed around portions of it. But the first real serious exploration on the continent began with Scott's expeditions, followed by Amundsen and then Shackleton. And that was from the very beginning of 1902, roughly up until 1921 or so, when Shackleton went on his last expedition. And our presence, the United States presence, began with the Byrd expedition of 1928 to 30. That was the first time that we had launched a serious expedition to explore the continent.
Very interesting. Aircraft down there. Now, of course, your book or your new film, the film that you're putting together, Ice Eagles, an account of American aviation in Antarctica. I mean, obviously, without aircraft, getting around there has got to be kind of tough. And looking at your website on your Kickstarter site, boy, talk about some again a cold place. Some of those pictures make you shiver just looking at the conditions, the extreme conditions that these people flew in and out of.
Yeah, and you have to realize that these aircraft were not designed for that purpose. So, going all the way back to the first Byrd expedition, it was an experiment. Byrd had the vision that aviation would really open up exploration, and particularly in places like Antarctica, where it is so difficult to get around. He took what you would call the state-of-the-art aircraft with him at the time, but it had never been tested under those conditions. So it was a huge learning curve for aviators, and that continued on, even through the early years of Operation Deep Freeze in the 50s and early 60s. There was a lot of writing the book that had to be done, things that weren't done before. And as I go through and research this story more and more and talk to the people that were actually involved, you just have to salute them for the courage they had and the endurance they had. Even when you think of something fairly simple in the U.S., such as doing a routine repair on an aircraft, on the engine. Well, down there, if you've got a storm blowing at 50, 60 miles an hour wind and constant snow and temperatures down in the 0 or below, doing those sorts of things become extremely difficult. And these guys went the extra mile.
Were there a lot of Tom, as you were researching this? Were there a lot of crashes? Were there a lot of accidents down there with aircraft that just since they weren't really designed to fly in that type of condition, did some of them fail? Did some of them crash?
Yes, yeah, definitely. The crashes in the early years before World War II were fairly limited, although there were some serious ones, simply because there weren't that many aircraft that were flying in those expeditions. But after the war, starting actually with Operation High Jump, 1946 to 47, the U.S. sent 13 ships and 4,000 men down there, and I forgot the exact count of the aircraft now, but something on the order of 20, 25 aircraft. And from that point on, in other words, from the point where there was a much larger presence on the continent, you saw more and more accidents happen. The U.S. Navy, of course, in the early years, did the primary support for the U.S. Down in the Antarctic. And their accident rate was something on the order of 8 times the rate of accidents elsewhere with their aircraft.
Wow.
So it was serious. There's been more than 30 people killed on the U.S. Side of it alone.
Well, just as a little side note here while you were talking, I clicked on the McMurdo Antarctica weather, and right now it's sunny, 10 below 0, and winds out of the north at 7. And it says a pleasant day on this little map. So quite a difference in temperature from where we're at.
Oh, yeah, and it's completely dark.
So is it dark? Is there any sun at all at this time of the year? Is it dark 24/7, or do they get a short day?
And no, it's pretty much 24/7, even at McMurdo at this point.
Wow.
They'll start to see some little bit of light on the horizon, probably in August. At Pole, there's actually just one day and one night. The sun's either above the horizon or below the horizon for 6 months of the year. And that's quite an experience. It's one of the things I guess I enjoyed about winter over is the unique experiences. You could go up out of the station along towards the end of March, and you see the sun very close to the horizon. And if you wanted to, you could watch it go completely around the horizon, 360 degrees, staying in basically the same spot.
Wow.
So
well, yeah, because you'd be at the center point, so you could see the Earth actually turning.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that would be evidence of that.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to believe that. We look up and see the clouds float by and stuff. We don't realize, I don't know what speed the Earth is spinning at, but I would say that would be an eye-opening experience for anybody to see.
Yes, it was one of those things that stays with you.
How long
definitely.
How long would it take for it to go all the way around?
It's a 24-hour day.
Okay.
So it's a normal day, but it's just staying basically the same height above the horizon,
Right.
all the way around.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Very interesting. You were aboard the research icebreaker Nathaniel B. Palmer. Tell us about that, Tom. How is life on an icebreaker? I know this year, a lot of icebreakers were in full service with the Great Lakes with the horrendous winter we had, and actually some of them even got trapped. What's life like on an icebreaker?
That was unique. The Palmer was designed specifically for Antarctic research, and it was the first icebreaker class ship that was designed that way. It was brand new, pretty much when I was on board it, and it was very, very comfortable. I'll have to say it was well appointed. The science equipment was first rate. But it was a dedicated ship, and so during the time when it is able to maneuver in the Antarctic, it goes 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So you'd work shifts in some cases, and something was always going on, and it was such a pressure to get things done because of the short summer season that as I said, there's always either you're collecting data at a point or you're moving to the next point, and that was a different way to see the Antarctic, and I enjoyed that as well. No aviation involved in that, though.
Right. Being on the breaker, I mean, was the ship pretty much crushing ice all the time down there? I mean, that'd have to be a little bit scary. I know I've seen some different documentaries on how those things are built. I mean, those ships are the construction is just unbelievable. But boy, the conditions that they're going through is pushes them right to the edge.
Yeah, in the summer it rarely gets into situations where you're constantly breaking ice. Although we did have a couple of days of pretty much doing just that. But it's very powerful. I don't have the engine specs with me right now, but it can break at a steady pace 6 feet of ice. So it gets you where you needed to go.
And not much can stop it, I would assume.
Yeah, and I would compare that with what the ships that went down in the earlier days, particularly in the 20s and 30s. They were still using wooden-hulled, three-masted ships, and they certainly weren't designed to break ice, and so they were pretty much at the mercy of what the ice pack did down there.
Yeah, I know some of those old ships, you'd see them where it appeared like they had actually fabricated or nailed some sort of steel plating to the front, but reading about some of those old ships, a lot of them would get stuck in the ice, and the ice would just crush them right where they stood.
Yes, that happened to Shackleton in his endurance expedition. It was another thing you had to be wary of and aware of in exploring the continent, because you are not in charge when you're down there. It will have its way, and you'd better be prepared. Interesting, in the third bird expedition, 1939 to 41, when they went back to evacuate the stations, there were two bases, one at Little America on the Ross Ice Shelf and another up on the peninsula at Stonington Island. And even up on the peninsula that year, the ice began to form very early, unusually early. And the ships could not get to the station. They could get within about 100 miles of it, but that was about it. And time was ticking down, because had they stayed much longer, they ran the risk of being frozen in themselves, and that meant spending the next winter there on the ice. So they didn't have the resources to get the people out overland, and they did have a Curtiss Wright Condor aircraft that was still operational at Stonington Island, and so they flew in two different flights because of the capacity of the Condor. They flew to a small island about 120 miles away, one that no one had ever landed on before, and they met the ship that they were supposed to board, the Bear, near there, but they came in and just basically crossed their fingers that they could make a landing, and they did.
Wow.
Went back and got the remainder of the crew and got everyone out. But that was an unforeseen process that it just points out that you have to be prepared for just about anything.
And even as much as you're prepared, Mother Nature can still it still rules, can still change the game all the time.
There's an old saying, at least one that I heard, that if you go down to the Antarctic enough times, sooner or later you'll do something stupid.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight, and we are so honored to have, is Tom Henderson. His new film coming up called Ice Eagles, an account of American aviation in Antarctica. Again, Tom, thank you so much for giving us some time on your weekend and your Saturday night.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
I find that I'm a huge aviation enthusiast, and to me, Antarctica, the North Pole, South Pole are just fascinating to me. McMurdo Station, I've read a lot about McMurdo, and again, I even had a little bit of interest in potentially working there. Just a lot of things that are so foreign to so many, but so interesting. And your film is going to sounds like it's going to bring to light a lot of the things that have happened that people didn't know about.
Some of it has been known for quite a while, but my film is the first that I'm aware of that will put the whole story together from 1928 to the present. And there's a lot to talk about there too. One of the things that impresses me is that since large aircraft have been flying down there, starting from Operation Deep Freeze on, the aircraft have been flown from New Zealand, from another landmass, to get to Antarctica. And that's anything but routine. It's roughly 1,700 miles from the point where the aircraft leave New Zealand to when they first make landfall in the Antarctic, and then another 400 or so miles to get to McMurdo. But in that span, if they should go down, there's a serious problem there. Mm-hmm. Even with the emergency capability that the Navy has now, if you ditch in the Southern Ocean, your period of survival is extremely small. And I talked to the guys who went down there in early Operation Deep Freeze, and really the only thing that was between them, or between New Zealand and the Antarctic in terms of rescue capability, was one picket destroyer. And that's to cover 1,700 miles. So if the plane goes down and you're in the water, the Southern Ocean rarely gets above freezing, or it doesn't get much above freezing. So unprotected, you last about 8 minutes.
Wow.
But even with a survival suit, those are good for maybe an hour. And that's the roughest ocean in the world. So I ask these guys, each time I interview one that took those flights, I said, what do you think about that? Because basically, if they go down, they're dead. Mm-hmm. And they'll tell me, well, I didn't think about it much, or, yeah, we knew that was possible, but it was part of the mission. And one of the guys told me, well, he'd already decided that if he ditched on the way out the door, he was grabbing the toolbox because he didn't want to come back up.
Yeah, to suffer for an hour wouldn't be worth it.
These guys had a lot of courage.
Yeah.
As I said, I have immense respect for them.
What, the thing is, Tom, you've been down there a couple of times, well, several times. What goes on down there is obviously it's not a, and I don't mean these questions to sound silly, but it's not a tourist place, although I would assume that if you probably have the money and you want to get there, there's a way to get there to see it. But is it mainly deep, cold research? Is there, what happens down? I mean, what goes on down there? Are there just a lot of different experiments that go on down there? I don't have to be fringy experiments either, but I'm saying medical stuff with the extreme cold, and of course it's pretty much of a bacteria-free environment. It's my understanding. What happens down there?
Pretty much anything you can do in science is going on down there. It's just flabbergasting to me, especially when I was able to compare my first trip down and the science that was going on in general, but particularly at South Pole Station, versus when I went back in '97. It was an order of magnitude more. I mean, there's everything from atmospheric studies to chemistry to geology to glaciation. There's various types of biological studies going on there. And it's, as I said, you name it, and there's probably something going on somewhere. And we're not the only ones down there, of course. Other nations have stations around the continent as well.
And I would assume, just looking at the vastness of some of the pictures, there's just places down there man has never physically touched. It's just so immense.
Many. It's 5.4 million square miles.
Wow. How much of that is ice and land versus land? Or is it a land mass with an ice cover on top of it?
If you stripped away the ice, there would be a series of land masses separated, so it'd be like a series of islands. But the ice is the biggest component of what's there, and at the highest point, there's about 2 miles of ice vertically. That's near Vostok. So it's enormous. It's just unimaginable, and that's one reason that there is so much concern about what's happening to the ice sheet down there, because there's so much of it. It could drastically affect what goes on in the rest of the world.
I can imagine. I got a couple questions for you. Now, when we talked initially, we said we're not going to talk about no crazy stuff, so I promised you we wouldn't do that. But I did get a couple questions that were a little unique. Let me go ahead and post these up to you, just to get your thoughts. One question from our good friend over in the UK, Red, writes in, says, does Tom know if they ever managed to drill into Lake Vostok? There was some sort of an experiment going on there about something being discovered. Any hints or clues or anything on that?
Yes, as far as I know, and I'm not the authority on this, but what had happened was that the Russians were conducting an extensive drilling operation down through the entire ice cap to reach bedrock, basically. And in the process, they were able to remotely determine through remote sensing devices that there was a huge lake right under the ice cap itself, water. The concern was that if they drilled into it, they may contaminate what would be a pristine environment that had been there for literally millions and millions of years. And there was a lot of discussion and trepidation and study of what they should do, if anything, because they stopped the drilling just above the point where they would have actually accessed the water. As I recall, I believe they did eventually work out a process whereby they could tap into the lake, extract the water, but not contaminate it. In other words, it would be it would all go in one direction. There wouldn't be any contamination from above.
Gotcha.
Which is it's remarkable when you could access water that has been there for millions and millions of years.
Yeah, probably pretty pure and clean, I would say.
One would think, but that's part of science, is to find out.
Yeah. Another question, Carl writes in. It says, Tom, congratulations on your movie. Can't wait to see it. And he says, Tom, is there fresh water there for drinking and living? I think what he means is, he wrote me a long email, but do they have to bring water in, Tom, or is that something that, are there wells there? Is that something they can punch through and get fresh water out of the ground?
Well, the good news is there's a lot of ice there, and ice makes water. So practically all of the water that is used in the bases down there comes from the ice in one way or another. Either melt water during the summer, or they actually would take the ice and convert it into water, which would require some energy. But I don't believe there are wells as such that are for the purpose of just extracting water.
Okay. So there's plenty of ice. Go get it in a bucket, melt it down, and there you go.
There you go. And that's how they did it in the early days.
Yeah, wow. As far as getting to McMurdo, now in the summertime, and I'm looking at a map here, is McMurdo accessible by ship? It
is now in almost all cases because we do have access to modern icebreakers. Mm-hmm. The ice edge during the summer varies from year to year, how far out from McMurdo Station it occurs. So it can be very close at the beginning of the summer, or it can be far away, and the purpose of the icebreakers in the beginning of the season is to go down there and break out a channel from the Ross Sea into McMurdo. And once that's done, it's actually amazing how fast the ice can move out of there so that they get accessed by ship. But the breakers are the ones that go in and do the first access to the station.
Is that how is most of the like at McMurdo here again? I'm looking at a picture of it. It's a pretty good sized town. It looks like a lot of the homes and sleeping quarters are made of big containers. Everything looks modularized. In the short summer, like at McMurdo, is that when all the fuel, like the diesel fuel and for heating and stuff, is that when that's usually trucked in the summertime, and enough of it trucked in so they can make it throughout the rest of the year?
Yes. Once the breakers are done and there's a channel cut, as soon as possible, they'll bring in a tanker containing the fuel for the coming winter, and then that's followed by a cargo ship that contains all the supplies that they would need again for the coming winter. And they also distribute supplies and fuel to the other U.S. stations as well, South Pole, and if Bird is operational, they'll fly supplies out there.
Interesting. Yeah, the one thing, one of our listeners, we've got a group of engineering students up at the University of Utah that listen to us, and Kathy writes in. She says, one thing I'd like you to ask Tom is, it appears there is a lack of anything green and living there. Is that true?
No. There are mosses and lichens. That's about the extent of it in terms of plant life. There are no flourishing trees or bushes, that sort of thing. But especially up in the Palmer Peninsula area, you quite frequently get you see mosses growing and lichens growing. But there is life. Life is tenacious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe just looking at the pictures and stuff. The pictures look pretty.
It is barren.
Pretty desolate.
Yeah, it is barren. It's a desert. Ice, rocks, dirt. That's pretty much it for most of the continent. But it has its own beauty. Anyone who's been there and seen, or privileged to have seen some of the more spectacular areas, as I did, in the Ellsworth Mountains, it just takes your breath away. Yeah. It's hard to describe.
Well, again, if you're it's something that I would love to see. Again, I assume that there's no. Do they allow tourists down there? Is it pretty much research and military type work?
Yeah, there is tourism. It's a very unique place in that no one owns Antarctica. Under the Antarctic Treaty that was first signed back in, I believe it was 1960, the agreement was that it would be preserved as a laboratory for science. And all claims, and there were a number of claims by various countries, would be held in abeyance for the time that the treaty is in effect. That treaty has been renewed once already, and it's one of the most remarkable success stories in diplomacy that I think has ever been seen, and it continues to allow for open science. You can go anywhere on the continent if you are doing science. There's no borders, no restrictions of that sort. Tourism has become more popular in the last 30 years or so, mostly by ship, but now we're getting also people coming in by aircraft, landing on the interior, and seeing it that way. So it's not prohibited. It is an expensive proposition, but it is not something that's prohibited.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting.